everyone. We are in Refugee Week, and it is the annual celebration of refugees and people seeking asylum and what they bring to their new homes, as well as an opportunity to raise awareness about the refugee experience. It is a participatory festival which typically encompasses arts, cultural, educational, and sporting events and more. It began in Australia in 1986 and is now celebrated across the globe. This year, with various stages of lockdown in place around the world and many events going online, we have taken the opportunity to build global partnerships for Refugee Week, which led to the birth of this event. The refugee experience is truly intentional and international, so of course it makes sense that our celebrations are international too. We are absolutely delighted to be bringing you this global storytelling night, the first of its kind. Together, we will hear from 4 incredible storytellers who have made different journeys in search of safety. They'll respond to one of the Refugee Week themes, Imagine and Welcome, with a short story from their own experience. It's both a privilege and a delight to have you all with us tonight. The Refugee Council of Australia is the peak national body of refugees and people seeking asylum and the organisations that serve them. Every year, we consult with people who are affected firsthand by refugee policy in Australia and use their experiences to call for a more humane, better approach in Australia and further afield. We convene Refugee Week in Australia, which sees thousands of people across the country taking part in the celebration in a myriad of different ways. I have personally worked with RCOA for over 4 years as an ambassador and in advocacy for refugee stories. Refugee Week UK is a festival celebrating the contributions, creativity, and resilience of refugees. Through of arts, culture, and education events alongside media and creative campaigns. Refugee Week UK aims to bring about positive encounters between communities, helping them to connect and learn from each other, and promoting a culture of welcome. Refugee Week UK is managed by Counterpoints Arts, a leading UK-based organisation in the field of arts, migration, and cultural change. My name is Mariam Issa, and I am your MC tonight. Storytelling is my chosen career path and passion, and tonight I want to share my reflections on the importance of stories as seeds of love embedded in our hearts. In our African oral traditions, it is said, cultures who don't tell stories die out. And this is a quote by Chris Abani, my favorite poet and human rights activist. As long as the stories were spoken and before they were even written down, there have been storytellers and listeners. And in our ancestry, storytelling was one of the most important traditions and was used as a tool for education, for settling disputes, and for celebrations. It was just like one of our technology apps today. The Gifts of Story, in my belief, is an app with which we can learn and understand the human condition. Listening to their stories and their songs gives us a great insight into their homes. The gifts of our memory and imagination is interwoven in this powerful tool of language and rhythm. And when we share these stories in platforms like this, we have the ability to spice and infuse our experiences with meaning and insight. And this fosters our human spirit. And I speak tonight to the theme of imagine, because to me, I feel that imagination is the conduit or lens through which we shape, mold, and create our desires. And more than ever before, we desire a world where we belong and thrive. building resilient and adaptable communities. I believe understanding our capacity is important in this conversation of imagining and celebrating our stories, because this can be the path to our becoming. This is only possible when we align our internal and external powers and hold spaces like this for each other, and create relations through our stories and memories so we can manifest our higher ideals and bring into view our imagined future. So tonight I will share a short story that was often told to us by our mother. She was a craftswoman and she weaved beautiful baskets and mats. So whenever she was starting a project, she would tell us it's a great idea to sit on your old mat to create your new one. Because when you're sitting on your old mat, you will see the mistakes and the patterns that you have made, you want to change in your new creation. She taught us in this simple story how to imagine our future by using our past. And in sitting in this mat tonight, I want all of us to support each other, because it is very important, I believe, that we share our stories in a meaningful way. And when we do that, I think we have the ability to elevate our experiences and to create new relations through this powerful platform. I came to Australia 21 years ago with 4 children, and I was pregnant with my 5th child. And today, Australia is my home, and I have opened my backyard as a community garden. And today I shared, it was a Tuesday, and we work in the community garden on Tuesdays. And I shared what I was going to do tonight with the volunteers who come. And she said, remember, Mariam, when you are with your friends and you're talking about the refugee experience tonight, if you're talking to the theme of imagination, she pointed out the story or the song of John Lennon, Imagine. And I listened to that song, and what a beautiful song. So welcome everyone. And we have an incredible night for you tonight with 4 beautiful storytellers who will share their experiences tonight. The first one that I would love to introduce to you and to welcome into this space is Mosna Jared. So Mosna is originally from Syria and is now a resident of Canada. She and her family fled their home and ended up in Turkey, where she founded Women Refugees, Not Captives, a campaign which works to end the forced marriage of women and children in refugee camps. Since then, she has continued her activism for women's rights around the world. She took part in peace-building activities in Istanbul, including work with the White Helmets, the Syria Civil Defense, on protection initiatives around mines and sexual and gender-based violence. In 2017, she helped to found the Syrian Women's Political Movement in Paris and continues to sit on the board. She is a winner of the Canadian Excellence in Global Women and Children's Health in the youth category in 2019, a recipient of the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers Annual Award for Outstanding Advocacy on behalf of the human rights of refugees, and was nominated to the finalist list of 75 top Canadian immigrants in Canada. Welcome, Mosna.
Hi, Mariam. Thank you. Imagine you are a woman and you couldn't go to washroom during nights because you are afraid of being harassed in your dark and long way from your camp to washrooms. Many refugee families offer their young daughters hands in marriage in the hope of protecting and gaining financial release. Extreme poverty, security concerns, literacy, and low level of awareness are just some of the many issues that led to the enforcement of early marriage on young refugee women and girls. Due to this extremely dangerous and increasingly serious phenomenon, I have founded لاجئات لا سبايا, Refugee Women Not Captives, a campaign in 2012 to protect refugee women and girls in Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, which means the neighboring countries of Syria, and to protect women in this country who they are in danger. Moreover, in Lebanon today, 41% of the young displaced Syrian refugee women and girls were forced to be married under the age of 19, given that many marriages are unregistered. These figures, in fact, are expected to be much higher. Parents of displaced families struggle to provide for their children and live in constant fear for their safety, especially when it comes to sexual violence and assault against refugee women and girls. As a result, many of these parents come to the conclusion that marriage could protect their young daughters from the harm while providing them with the basic needs and some level of financial stability. In many communities, marriage is seen as a way to protect the girl, virginity, and honor. Some girls are also married off to facilitate the entry of their family's members into Jordan, as girls who marry Jordanian citizen husbands may be able to get sponsorship allowing them and their families to move out of the camp. Imagine I have handed out a wassail and a light for women in camp to help them to get the sense of safety when they wanted to go to washrooms. I'm Musnad, Syrian asylum seeker in Canada, and advocate for for participation and fighting against half-baked solutions. When the revolution broke out in my city in Syria, I was so young, and my family was a victim of brutal dictator regime in Syria. We went to street to ask for political reforms and for our liberties and freedom. But my uncle got killed in a demonstration in my neighborhood, and my brother got arrested twice. Our home has been destroyed by warplane of Syrian army, and the rest of my family trapped under siege imposed by the Syrian regime on my neighborhood, without water, food, and electricity. I arrived to Canada 3 years ago after I spent my time in Turkey to seek asylum and safety after the military coup happened in Turkey. I was selected for internship with Noble Women's Initiative in the capital of Canada, and my journey in the global north has started where I know no one and I need to start from zero. No friends, no family, and long time of cold winter and wait for my paper. One day I wrote down on my Facebook page asking for accommodation for short time or for couch surfing. A Canadian family sent me a message that they could host me for a temporary time. I moved to their home for a temporary time, but I stayed for a while, a year and a half, and the parents of this family did a private sponsorship for my parents and my brother. And finally, I met them after 3 years, and we reunited again 6 months ago here in Montreal. Here I did a new kind of activism by emphasizing women participation in the peace process in diaspora for Syria, where we have created Syrian Women's Political Movement, and I've been elected as a youth journal secretariat member for the movement to shape Syria's future and design peace and justice from here, our exile, to our land back home. But my role of helping women in danger doesn't end. I'm still in Montreal receiving cases of forced marriage, sexual violence and domestic violence weekly. And by my network and my friends in neighboring countries, I'm ended up helping them. In my work hours, I work as a liaison officer of the White Helmets, where our team ran to help the victims of bombardment of Assad regime by pulling their bodies from under rubble and give them a chance to survive. We operate in an area where there's the usual double attacks, the first one to target civilians, and after 1 year in Canada, I nailed myself by being part of justice movement of Indigenous people here. So I have created Indigenous Refugees Movement as a both group are stigmatized, traumatized, and uprooted from their land, where I create a safe space for both of them to discuss the future, the past, and the present of refugees, and also to tackle the question if refugees are settler or part the settler, if refugees are a settler and part of colonization system, or they are simply just survivors. I went with Canadian Red Cross as a volunteer to Roxham Road multiple times, where I did like a volunteering work to help refugees who are crossing the borders from US to Canada to seek asylum. Thousands of people must cross borders to escape life-threatening violence, war, and persecution. I felt the sense of Syria-Turkey borders recalled in my memory at Canadian-American borders. Same scene, same needs, and same.
Thank you so much, Muzna. That was an incredible story. Muzna's lived experience as a refugee and the contributions that she brings to Canada. Next, our storyteller is Erin, is a stand-up comedian, poet, photographer, writer, and filmmaker. He has worked with Birds Without Borders, Who Are We, and Exile Writers, Inc. His work has appeared in Index on Censorship, Poetry Connections, Soul Immigrants, The Shop, and the Floor Literary Festival website. He translated Cry of Bosnia, a personal diary of the Bosnian War by Elvira Simic, won the Italian Premio Addison for children's stories and is currently developing scripts for theatre. His publications include a poetry collection, Personal Things, and the Rest. Eden joins us from UK, and it is lunchtime, I guess, at your place, Eden. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Great to be part of this global pandemic of celebration of Refugee Week. We've finally entered every corner of the globe. That's what you call squaring of a sphere. There is such a thing. And like with any pandemic, there is something that you call patient zero. With refugees, refugee zero. Zero. I belong to this group. I am your original refugee, long time ago. That's long before this cross-continental, cross-national celebration of refugees, where everybody becomes quite obsessed with that. So you have journalists, TV crews, politicians, social workers, conference organizers. They all lined up to welcome refugees as they step off their dinghy boats. Sooner or later, all that entourage, all the welcoming party will go home and collect their paychecks. And refugees will duly be sent to one or the other detention center or to island somewhere in the ocean. Now I'm talking about time before where, in years back, where one would just quietly step off the boat, declare if arriving for a business or pleasure, and get on with it. Of course, here and there would be an occasional high-profile refugee, perhaps one or the other denouncer of communist regime across the world, or maybe a ballet dancer or a poet. But poets are not that reliable in the sense of this statistics, because poets can often be exiles in their own home. I mean, it's just enough to write a wrong sonnet and you are under the lockdown, or maybe you didn't write a right love poem to a certain person and then you are again in exile. So I'm really talking about this time before, when there wasn't none of these refugees welcome. But to be honest, when I arrived to London, I have been welcomed by the most unlikely party of people from down under. A bunch of Aussies and occasional Kiwi. I have promptly learned not to mistake an Aussie for a Kiwi. It's even a worse mistake than to took a Croat for a Serb. So London was awash with those people, and they were all having great time, never getting sober, to realize that they have been exploited by non-scrupulous pub landlords or middle-class families from Fulham, Putney, Chiswick, where they were working as au pairs. But they were kind to me. They took me under their wing, and they even helped me to get a job distributing magazines to early commuters on London Underground. They were not interested in this kind of job because their parties would normally end around the time when you would have to stand in front of the entrance to the Underground. So I was grateful, and there was even the magazine called Southern Cross, aiming at the people from down under, where they could communicate with each other, post a lot of photographs, holding pints of beer. I think even I featured in one or two of these photographs. And there is one other thing that I'm really grateful for being welcomed by Aussies. They actually taught me some basic principles of cricket. Aussies were then on the top of the world, and as you know, cricket is that quintessential English game where you stand in some corner of the vast field, watching other people throwing ball at each other and then whacking it with a massive bat. So years later, when I was passing my British citizenship exam, I was asked if I know anything about the cricket, and I promptly told that that's that game. The examiners found it mildly amusing, and here I am, a British citizen. But come mid to late 90s of the last century, oh my God, I'm telling you, I am your refugee zero. All the Aussies and Kiwis disappeared from London, being replaced by even cheaper labor from European Union and plenty of refugees. Apparently, Aussies went enriched with their overseas experience to set up the Refugee Week in Australia. Some of them, of course, entered into the eco-friendly businesses like selling coal to Chinese. But that's where I began to realize that I might actually be a refugee myself. Up to that point, I have always passed as a Frenchman. So, you know, every English person immediately wanted to talk to me in French and to complain about the rudeness of French waiters on their last holiday when they were in Paris or somewhere else. So I had to say, look, mate, I really feel for you, but I'm actually from Yugoslavia, and there is a war going on over there. And they say, oh, Yugoslavia. Which one are you then? Funny enough, no Aussie ever asked me that question. I suppose I reminded them somehow of distant Croatian cousin, or maybe a distant Serbian ancestor or something like that. But Yugoslavia, that mythical country, 6 republics, just like 6 states in Australia, 4 religions, 2 underlying principles, socialism and steal as much as you can, and 1 benign director called dictator at the time. And of course, 1 Adriatic coast of everybody wanted to have a piece of. No wonder my uncle started a war fighting over a patch of land where they wanted to build their summer holiday. And I found myself in a distant semi-continent called Britannia. So here I am. And it took me a long time to realize that I am actually a refugee. But by the time I applied for political asylum, it was refused, and I became a failed political asylum seeker. But, you know, the realization that some of my neighbors actually were war criminals helped in speeding up my decision to come to terms that I am a refugee. Looking back on this time, there were some telltale signs of trouble to come. I mean, look, a passport of Yugoslavia had 6 flaming torches on its cover. No wonder it all ended up in smoke. I mean, what kind of people will put that sort of stuff on their passport cover? You Aussies, you're fine. You know, you just have a kangaroo and emu, and it's sort of very friendly, child-friendly, all-friendly. But I'm beginning to worry about my new country, just as I gained the new country, Britannia. And when I try to explain to the people what happened in Yugoslavia, they say, no, it will never happen here. And look what's going on. Britannia is apparently turning into Brexitania. And there are these telltale signs of possible trouble to come, you know? Do you know what's on cover of British passport? Lion and unicorn. I mean, what kind of people will put these 2 animals together? It is really asking for a trouble. Anyhow, I'm here defending rights of all of us to live together. And I can tell you, I can't wait to get an invitation to visit friends in Canada and Australia, where we can keep promoting such ideas. You were great. You listened to me for a long time, and I appreciate you. Bye for now.
Thank you so much, Muzin. That was a beautiful story. And our third storyteller for the night is Yasmin Odisho Karawi. Yasmin is a performer, theatre maker, and writer. She was born and raised in Baghdad and is of Iraqi, Assyrian, and Syrian origins. She originally studied international relations and anthropology and worked for several years in the human rights sector before pursuing her passion in performance. She then trained in performing arts and has since worked in this field. She has since been involved in devising works with ensembles in Germany and the UK in English, Arabic, and Germany, including When Farah Cries, by Syrian playwright Mughar Al-Haji and Satir. Welcome to the UK. She recently worked as creative assistant director on a museum in Baghdad by Palestine-Irish writer Hannah Khalil with the Royal Shakespeare Company. She is currently performing stand-up comedy with Counterpoints Arts, No Direction Home. When not immersed in the world of theatre and performance, she works alongside immigration lawyers and activists to support people seeking in asylum in Europe. Yasmin is a member of Psyche Delight and London-based theatre company of Sanctuary. Yasmin also joins us from the UK. Welcome, Yasmin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here with all of you and to hear your stories. Thank you, Musna and Adrian, for sharing your stories. I think mine is going to set a little bit of a different tone, maybe. So here we go. I first planned my escape when I was about 8 years old. Not from the house, but from the whole city, the whole country. It wasn't like that in my earlier years. In fact, I loved my life so much, I felt like I was living inside of a film. The sounds, the colors, the movement, especially the colors. The intensity of them. I've recorded them with my eyes. The cool blue of the pool that I used to swim in, the green of the leaves of the orange trees in our garden, the yellow, the warm, hot sun. But then one day, the colors started to bleed away. Even the color from my own face left me. If it wasn't for my dad to slap me right back into life again. I remember the neighbors gathering around the radio in our front yard. هنا إذاعة مونتي كارلو. سيداتي سادتي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الساعة 1 تماما بتوقيت غرينتش في راديو مونتي كارلو. يقول دبلوماسيون غربيون إن وقف إطلاق النار لن يصبح ممكنا إلا متى بدأ العراق انسحابا سريعا من الكويت. And just like that, everything looked like an overexposed, faded, dry, crumbled picture. But I was determined to recover my colors, and I knew exactly where they lived. Inside my television. How I dreamed of these faraway places. These large, clean boulevards lined with large trees. The hill, sitting on a hill and looking onto 1,000 little twinkling lights stacked vertically, illuminating the glossy night. A place where ice creams weren't illegal. I can just buy them off the back of a truck. So at the age of 8, I decided I'm gonna travel. I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to do that, but I did go to my father's room, take one of his sports bag, and started to neatly fold my t-shirts. At that moment, my younger sister and brother walked in and asked me what I was doing, and I said I was traveling, so they decided to join me. It was a perfect opportunity. Both my mother and father were out of the house, and the person who was looking after us was busy in the backyard. So we snuck out, the three of us, took a left again through the passageway that led to the main road behind our house, and then we head north towards the Tigris River, which wasn't really that far away from my house, but for a 9-year-old was miles away. I wasn't exactly sure how it was going to work, but I was determined that I was going to travel. I was determined to try, at least, to see what would happen. I'm not sure how long we walked before I decided to turn back home, but by the time we returned to the house, both my mother and father were infuriated, scared, angry. They were just about to call the police when we had arrived. My father, who's usually calm and patient, looked at me. "Where were you? What were you doing? Where did you go?" In that moment, In my fright, I just looked at him and said, I was traveling. And in that moment, like a bucket of ice cold water fell over him, and he was instantly silent. It will be 20 years before my father would reunite with his family in Syria and in Lebanon. Because although my father had no business in politics and was only making his nougat and Turkish delight, a sweets maker by craft, he was still a suspect, especially after the Iraqi government and the Syrian government fell out. And any Syrian national traveling back to Syria at the time was interrogated, and, well, it was a risk he was not willing to take. But then one day, he announced that we were traveling. I was around 15 at the time. I remember the summer of 1998. It was dusk. We all got into the car and went off. By the time the sun rose, we were surrounded by nothing but vast, white, yellow sand. It was starting to get a little bit hot as the morning was advancing, and my father turned to the driver and asked him if he could turn on the air conditioner, but the driver came up with an excuse not to turn it on in that moment. A few hours later, my father asked again, and the driver kept coming up with excuses, and finally, after my father was fed up, he decided to ask him again, only to find out that the reason that the driver was not turning on the air conditioner is because he had filled up the car with petrol, cheap petrol that he bought from Iraq, that he was going to sell for a much higher price in Syria. So we were a ticking bomb driving through 55 degrees Celsius in the desert. 20 hours later, we arrived to our destination unscathed. And there, at 15, I finally met the sea for the first time. And I finally saw my first mountain. 2 years later, at 17, I decided that I am going to finally execute my exit plan, my escape plan. I was going to go as far away as possible. I was going to go to these places that have filled my world and my imagination. The places of the films and movies. Lucky for me, I had an aunt that was living in the United States at the time, because she had migrated along with her rest of her family in the 70s in search for a better life and opportunity. And she said she was going to have me. Well, I began it. I began the journey. I started to apply to universities in the United States of America. But unfortunately, the speed of communication did not match my enthusiasm and impatience. I had spent all these years being a good student, getting the bestest of grades. I even studied an entirely different and separate curriculum just to sit for these official British O-level GCSE examinations so that I would be eligible to apply to these respectful universities after I discovered that actually my high school diploma is not worth toilet paper. So I did it all. Not only that, but I spent hours and hours, month after month, year after year, trying to perfect my English, because I decided as a young child that if I was going to speak the English language, I was going to speak it the way the English speakers spoke it. And where better to learn from the movies that I was watching. Of course, lots of people made fun of me, the way I twisted my letters, the way I twisted, that's a really bad American accent by now. I did try to get rid of it. But for some time I did pass. Was that my intention? I'm not sure. But I was getting ready, in any case. And at the time, unfortunately, while all the world had already been using the internet and communicating casually via email, Iraq remained unplugged. And so I had to rely on the services of a courier service that guaranteed the delivery of my post within 1 to 2 months. There was no internet. The Iraqi government at the time was not a big fan of receiving any information from the outside world that was unfiltered. They were very keen that their people needed to receive well-packaged truths. Even people who owned satellite dishes at the time were at the risk of being executed or sent to jail for a very long time, if they're lucky. But at some moment, my father decided that he is no longer going to tolerate the two government-run channels, and he was going to take the risk. And my Lord, when he brought that satellite dish, it was a portal to the world. All these channels with cartoons and films and movies and music and news channels. Al Jazeera. And I remember in 1998 when the United States of America decided to go and carpet bomb Iraq, causing more destruction in 4 or 5 days than they have done in the entire Gulf War. They called it Operation Desert Fox. Well, at that time, lucky for us, our electricity did not go off. And so we had Al Jazeera reporting live on the war in Iraq while we were in the heart of Baghdad. The reporter of Al Jazeera would be standing on the roof of a house. And as he's speaking, a missile would fall right behind him. A light would come out. He would duck. And the rest of us at home would just close our ears as we listened to the reverberations of the explosion that had just fallen, the missile that had just fallen a kilometer or two away from our house. Lucky for me, however, the internet connection, my communication, my attempts to arrive to the United States and study over there all fell through. In the last minute, my aunt decided that she cannot host me. The university lost my admission package. Who knows? But the universe had decided for me. And I remained in Lebanon. I was lucky enough and grateful enough to study in Lebanon and to live in Lebanon for a few years, slowly retrieving the colors of my life. But soon, the obsession gripped me again after Israel's war in 2006. And I decided, and I had the opportunity again and the fortune to get on a plane and to travel to London, where I've been for several years. And in London, a whole new chapter began. The irony doesn't escape me. Leaving these wars behind only to come to the place where wars are manufactured. But also, where I felt some hope lived. I'm always fascinated by the world between reality and imagination. In the last few years, I've been working with the people who have braved the journey to Europe, people seeking asylum, seeking refuge, people that have come from wars and conflict zones, people who have escaped violence. But it's not only the violence of missiles and fighting that leads us to leave. Injustice, the injustice we experience is violent. The inequality is violent. The oppression that we leave behind is violent. The poverty is violent. I'm always fascinated when I speak to some of these people, how I remember all the images, the colors, the sounds that filled my imagination through the movies and the films that I watched. And the hope of a more peaceful, joyful, colorful life. Our inability to empathize with the people who have risked their lives and the lives of those they love, their children, to come on some flimsy rubber dinghies to cross the seas or the oceans to Australia. Our inability to empathize, our fear, the fear that has been manufactured. The fear, this misplaced fear, is truly a testament of our failure to imagine, a failure of our imagination.
Thank you for such a captivating story, Yasmin. It was a real pleasure to listen. Our fourth storyteller is Darius Koko Akbeko Zadu. Darius is originally from Togo and now lives in Hong Kong, where he dedicates himself to bringing together refugees, students from mainland China, and young people from Hong Kong over the common cause of serving the local community. He does this through the medium of sport. He is the founder, director, and coach Anti-Legends Sport Academy and the captain of the All Black Football Club. Darius is passionate about refugee-led advocacy and co-founded RepLead HK, the first refugee-led network in Hong Kong, and is actively involved in setting up the Asia-Pacific network of refugees. Darius is passionate about improving the working conditions of marginalized communities, mainly refugees and ethnic minorities, and hosts talks in Hong Kong, shedding light on the plight of people seeking asylum around the world. He believes refugees can contribute positively towards social and economic change in Hong Kong and worldwide. Darius is an alumnus of the Resolve Foundation Fellowship and the Professional Fellows Program of the US State Department. He was the Hong Kong representative at the Asia Pacific Summit of Refugees in 2018 and has participated in international training and outreach activities, including through the UN. Darius joins us today from Hong Kong, where it is 7 p.m. and he is on his way home from work.
I remember one afternoon I was at the immigration center for my every 6 weeks report. The report is for refugees and asylum seekers to put down their signature on a piece of paper. As I was waiting, I saw an upset refugee male talking to one of the immigration officers, as he has been kept there for the second consecutive whole day as punishment for missing his regular report date. It was after 5 p.m. The center was about to close. I hear the man explaining to the officer that he needed to take care of his baby as his wife needed to work. That's the reason why he missed his original report date. He was asked again to go back home and come back the next day, which he thought was not right. Their interaction escalated, and the officer told him, "Go back to your country. We don't want you here." I was shocked. I could have expected this kind of statement from people on the street, but not from an immigration officer who is trained to deal with refugees. If the immigration officer, who is bound to treat you fairly according to the law, allows himself to say things like that, using we in a plural form, which means the system itself is designed to reject you, not to welcome you. Moving further, let me share with you what one government contracted NGO put on their website about their service users. They serve refugees, of course. I quote, "Whom we serve, foreigners who smuggle themselves into Hong Kong, and visitors who overstayed their limit of stay allowed by the Immigration Department, or who were refused entry upon arrival at Hong Kong, are subject to be removed from Hong Kong in accordance with immigration ordinance. Illegal immigrants who lodge claims refusing to be removed to another country are called non-refoulement claimants." End of quote. This very wrong, unfair, and offensive description goes to everyone seeking protection in Hong Kong, including all genuine and skilled protection claimants. The local community here in Hong Kong has seen refugees through the lens of the local government, the government NGOs, and the government media, and therefore creating an environment where refugees are seen as criminals and not welcomed. In light of this, some of us think we have a role to play in shifting the negative perception and rejection the society has for refugees. A year after I arrived in Hong Kong, I picked up basic English, allowing me to communicate better with people, as I originally speak French. I then engaged myself into outreach programs through different NGOs. I've been to many different schools, universities, and collaborated with different corporates to educate people on who a refugee really is. What makes a person seek protection outside their home country? And how does it feel like to leave a place you love and belong for a place you know nobody or know nothing about? And how much refugees can contribute to society? I love storytelling, and I'm good at it, I believe. So I use this skill to inspire people and show them how much refugees can contribute if they are given the chance and platform to do so. I spoke at a TED Talk in 2018 here in Hong Kong, where I talk about refugees not being a burden, but resources. And this talk had a great impact on the refugee community and also in the host community. I'm good at playing African drum and dance. So I've used music to connect to local people, to open up their hearts and promote understanding and acceptance for refugees and asylum seekers, to create a space where refugees and asylum seekers are welcome. I'm good at playing football, so I've used my football skills as a way to reach the local community, breaking down barriers and stereotypes, and to enjoy the fun of playing football together. I was the captain of a refugee football team right here in Hong Kong. And as we play against local teams, they quickly end up making friends with us and seeing us based on our talents and skills, because they see us beyond the status we have. They welcome and embrace us. For many years, many of us advocate for positive change in the way refugees are perceived. There have been many allies we've got from the local communities who understand the needs and the benefits of welcoming refugees. The vast majority has remained skeptical in changing their attitudes and perceptions towards us. Many of them thought that their home is safe for them and there is no need for them to bother about refugee issues. Many others think that refugees issues are too far from them and think that these issues are for other people to deal with. The truth is, we all have a role to play in making our world a better place for everyone. The world generally has not been welcoming to refugees, even though some countries are trying their best to do better. Hong Kong has not been welcoming to refugees. Today, due to the political situation on the ground, I now see Hong Kong people seeking asylum in Canada, Germany, Taiwan, and in many other countries. One Hong Kong asylum seeker in Canada recently shared to one of the news media in Hong Kong called the Hong Kong Free Press. I quote, "I was left with two choices. I have to either flee Hong Kong or face political persecution. It is like a minute ago, you were having dinner with your family, and the next minute, you are in another country across the Pacific Ocean." End of quote. Things change, and anyone can become a refugee and will want to be welcome somewhere else. It is something that more and more people are slowly understanding nowadays, but we still have a long way to go. I hear statements such as, if we welcome refugees, more will come. Refugees are criminals. They will destroy our places and steal our jobs. This is completely wrong. I've seen refugees creating jobs. I've seen outstanding creativities in different refugee communities, abilities and skill sets beneficial to the host communities. I have lived in Hong Kong for almost 8 years. I haven't been, and I'm not a criminal. I haven't destroyed any place. I haven't stolen any jobs. I create jobs instead. I run my own sports company and do many other volunteering and advocacy works to create positive change in society. I therefore participate and contribute to the greater good of the community. And so do many other refugees here in Hong Kong and elsewhere in the world. What if we open up to refugees, welcoming them and putting their skills and potential to good use? What if we start seeing refugees as capable people, needing our support to thrive and contribute to our communities and to the world? By changing our perceptions of refugees, by welcoming and supporting them, we will not only help them boost their self-reliance and help them thrive, but also it will lead to policy and systematic changes that will enable them to be active contributors to the development and prosperities of our nations. And because we see refugees as people who only need fish, we are afraid they will take away our fish and make us hungry. What if we see them as people who can fish for themselves? Only then we won't be afraid of losing our fish to them, and we won't be scared of welcoming and embracing them. Our world is rapidly changing, and nobody knows what will happen to them or to their beloved home. Today, we might be the host, but tomorrow, we might become the guest. Let's welcome refugees. Let's welcome our fellow humans. Thank you.
To summarize the stories of our powerful storytellers tonight is the power of story and in the way we relate to each other through these stories. So when Edin's story, when he said he made friends with Aussies in England, and they were the first people who welcomed him. To me, I made friends with English people in Australia, and they were the ones actually English migrants who welcomed me into the Australian community. And I also relate with Muzna's story of the passion of supporting young women in spaces like, because as refugees, I think we have walked in the plight of women. And as women, we have seen the struggle, when a country disintegrates or disappears around you, the people who are most hit are young people and mothers and women. So I share your passion of women. And in Yasmin's story, I share your passion of languages. And I have two daughters, one who speaks fluent English in an American accent, and the other one speaks in an Australian Bogan accent. So, collectively, what these stories, to me, as I was listening to all of you, I felt that life in itself is like a safari. It is an extension of our lived experiences. A plateau that invites and engages us to shape and mold and design our stories in the way we want it to relate to the people around us, to discover our identities. And in every phase of our lives, we have a different story. I also feel that it is a platform that compels us to ask brave and courageous questions. And when we do come to platforms like this and ask these brave questions, I think our experiences not only change, but they have the power to transform. And we can bring into view a powerful imagination into the world that we want to share. We might not live in the same worlds all the time, but we can share a world together through imagination and through the process of curating and designing our stories together. So this has been an incredible platform, and we are immensely grateful for your stories. And I want everyone in the audience, and of course we do have an audience out there, to appreciate the connections and the incredible stories that refugees bring to these worlds. Because I think through our journeys, our hearts open, and when we come to the spaces of asylum and we are seeking asylum, we do have the power to open the hearts of others for compassion. And in these times where we've been hit by the COVID-19, I think we all see that our world is not going to be the same. It has changed forever, and the new world is here. It is up to us to imagine what we want that world to look like. So thank you all for being here with us tonight and for celebrating this incredible Refugee Week with us.